OutSummit will hold its 9th annual conference on Monday in Washington, D.C. and not New York, the United States. The gathering aims to advance the human rights and inclusion of the LGBTIQ people in a global context. The forum brings together global advocates, activists and allies to advance gay rights globally. For more on this conversation, we're joined by Outright International Communications Manager Matuba Mahlatjie. Matuba, appreciate your time this evening. Thanks so much for speaking to us. Let's start off with what OutSummit is and what is its significance.
Thank you so much for having me, Hugo. So every year around International Human Rights Day, which is on the 10th of December, Outright International convenes what we call OutSummit. This is the 9th one, as you rightfully said in your intro. This is a conference that to advance human rights and inclusion of LGBTIQ people everywhere. And OutSummit is where you have people from across civil society, government, philanthropy, and business come together to strategize and build momentum to accelerate the change for LGBTIQ people. And this year's OutSummit will be a hybrid event. So people who are watching this interview at the moment can go to outrightinternational.org and scroll a bit down and you'll find the OutSummit tab where you can join this important conversation that will be happening virtually as well. And it's happening in person here in Washington, D.C. And it's significant. I'm sure we've seen the pushback against human rights and especially for LGBTIQ people. And we struggle with having inclusive economies in our countries. And each year, the World Bank makes about 100 billion available to low and middle income countries, and these funds pay for education, for health, and for social protection programs. And OutSummit will be one of those platforms where we monitor if LGBTIQ programs are inclusive or are included in those programs. And there will be a session at the OutSummit where we'll describe inclusive bank advocacy network. And you will also remember how the World Bank reacted to Uganda's Anti-Homosexuality Act. And this is because of people like who do the work that we do around the world, who put pressure on institutions like the World Bank to actually live up to their own policies and values to react the way they reacted to Uganda and not give them further any funding that's not inclusive. So this is just one of many platforms for the OutSummit to advocate for inclusivity for LGBTQ. And I heard earlier in your news bulletin you were talking about elections. We also have another panel discussion, which I will be moderating, that talks about inclusive democracies. And in 2024, it's not only South Africa that's going to elections. You have about actually, 2024 is quite an important year in terms of elections because there will be about 2 billion people that will head to polls around the world for the next government on different levels. And for many countries, the results of any elections can mean the difference between the further entrenchment of authoritarian policies and practices or turning a point in the fight against democratic backsliding. So the days leading up to any election, as I say, will be essential for citizens, particularly the LGBTI communities, to elevate their voices and make the expectations for communities, for inclusive governance, accountability and transparency. And this OutSummit will be that platform because we'll have people from all over the world who play crucial roles in influencing policies in their specific countries to ensure that there's inclusivity.
Matuba, summits like this often run under a specific theme. Does OutSummit 2023 have a theme?
Yes, so inclusivity is the main theme. So we're focusing on inclusivity and focusing on the LGBTQ communities that suffer, that are most vulnerable. And that would be people in countries where they are criminalized. So that's why we speak about inclusive economies, because you end up having LGBTQ people who are exiled from their countries. And most of those countries are countries that are quite poor and they can't even contribute positively to their own economies to advance the lives of everybody. So inclusivity will be the key word at this upcoming summit in Washington, D.C. And we also talk about inclusive democracies because we also want to see LGBTQ people participating meaningfully in democratic mechanisms and processes, which we don't see a lot in a lot of countries because we still have the high tide against the high tide of homophobia that's against us that we still need to fight against, because we only have about 22 countries that don't criminalize homosexuality in Africa, and that there's a lot of work for us to do. And OutSummit intends to be a proactive platform where we strategize on how to win over those countries that still criminalize homosexuality, and to ensure that all LGBTQ people are protected and they contribute positively to their countries.
Well, you speak of 22 countries that don't criminalize homosexuality on the African continent, and that leaves about 32 that do. How many of these 32 have been invited to this inclusive summit?
So, as Outright International, we have proximity to diplomats at the United Nations, and these are people that we engage on a daily basis, because we have a UN program that engages with countries that criminalize homosexuality. And we also use the countries that do not criminalize homosexuality to help us to create an environment for meaningful dialogue between us and countries that criminalize. And that's been working for us. And OutSummit has been open to everybody, and we've extended invitation to most countries that show interest in advancing the human rights. And we encourage member states of the United Nations, even those who criminalize homosexuality, to join OutSummit and listen to the conversations and see how they can contribute to global advancements of human rights, especially for LGBTIQ people.
Matuba, I don't quite see the value of inviting individuals that are interested in your issues. Surely the focus, when you look at countries like Uganda and countries like Kenya, for instance, that have spoken out visibly around LGBTQI plus rights, that it makes more sense to engage them and hear what it is that you have to say. Almost a case of pleading your case. You see it differently?
I'll tell you the value, Hugo, in talking to people who do not criminalize homosexuality, because you have South Africa, for example, that has beautiful laws, progressive laws, and policies that are not implemented. We're still working on that at this stage. We still get invited. We still invite diplomats, like South African diplomats at the United Nations level, who sometimes do not even attend meetings that we come to, and we are still trying to engage those kind of problems, so that by the time we move on to people who criminalize homosexuality, we have enough support from countries like South Africa and Botswana and Namibia, who are still reluctant to support LGBTQ people. So I think it's important for us to build a firm foundation before we reach out to uncharted territory, because we need to have support. We need to convince South African government not to say that they respect the autonomy of Uganda, and that's why they will not condemn them for criminalizing homosexuality. So there's a lot of foundation work to be done before we start posturing and antagonizing countries that criminalize homosexuality. Our work is not to create an adversarial relationship with countries that criminalize, but we want to create meaningful dialogue, and we need help of member states like South Africa and Botswana, Angola, and Mozambique, and other countries that do not criminalize homosexuality. So,
OutSummit 2023 is obviously the ninth one, as you've indicated. So let's go back to the first one and just look at some of the milestones that you've achieved in the last 9 summits.
So we've achieved quite a lot, because we have a core group in the United Nations that started 15 years ago with just 15 member countries, and today almost all member countries are part of the UN LGBTI core group. So when we discuss LGBTIQ issues, we have more member countries than we used to have perhaps 15 years ago or 30 years ago, when the core group was non-existent. So the LGBTIQ agenda is always at the top at the United Nations level, and this is something that never used to happen. And we have more signatories to human rights treaties that bind countries to advance the rights of LGBTIQ people. So in that regard, we see that as progress, and we see that there is always a table to sit around, and because once you're not at the table, you become the menu. So LGBTIQ people are always around tables with member states that criminalize and that do not criminalize homosexuality. And this is thanks to the United Nations LGBTIQ core group that gives us this platform to be able to have diplomatic discussions with member states.
So let's talk about the importance of shedding light on the potential impact of political transitions on marginalized communities.
I lost you there, Hugo. Do you want to repeat your question, please?
So let's talk about the potential impact of political transitions on marginalized communities. How important a factor is that for you in this conference?
Well, it's quite important because, you know, in 2023 we have noted some very disturbing developments that, and we see that the marginalization of LGBTQ people come from religious and sometimes political perspectives. And a good example is that, you know, we've noted reports of, you know, Russian religious or conservative actors in African countries and their opposition to LGBTQ rights. And we have come across some relevant details, like in Uganda, where there have been reports that Russia invited Uganda parliamentarians to Moscow before the enactment or the passage of the Anti-Homosexuality Act. Additionally, in Kenya, the Russian embassy retweeted a quote on it's not Twitter anymore, I think it's called X, of the Kenya's deputy president opposing LGBTQ rights and added commentary supporting what they call protection of traditional values. So we are concerned about the influence of other countries on other countries about marginalized people. So that puts marginalized people at a very vulnerable position. And even at the Russia-Africa summit, we saw President Putin also emphasizing the importance of these traditional values and expressing solidarity with African countries who are rejecting the legalization of same-sex unions. So it is possible that there is more active Russian anti-gender work happening in Africa, driven by economic goals, and maybe a desire to challenge Western influence, potentially using LGBTIQ rights as a bargaining chip. So there's no telling whether Russia or other influential countries that are conservative or that hate LGBTQ people will have influence on countries that are economically vulnerable. And as I say, LGBTIQ people or LGBTQ rights can be used as a bargaining chip. So with the upcoming elections, we are looking at which countries have more influence where and how we can be proactive using OutSummit to counter those eventualities or those possibilities, rather.
Matuba, I'm going to give you 60 seconds to answer this next question because we've run short of time. It is currently 16 days of activism against GBV. What is your message at this time?
You know, our message as Outright International is action. We need more action than these events and that are always we see on TV, where people are having high-level dinners and raising funds for GBV, where we don't see the actual results. We need journalism to be used effectively in countries, especially South Africa, where women are being killed. Femicide is so high, and it's our children are also in danger. So we need action from everybody, from civil society, from the Fourth Estate, the newsrooms in South Africa. I don't think that enough is being done to expose what's not being done to protect women and children in this scourge of GBV. So more action and less talking is my message. My message on behalf of Outright International at the moment.
I do appreciate your time and wish you a successful conference. That was Outright International Communications Manager Matuba Mahlatjie.